but Bob gave him the read, so appreciate that. Some of you I saw about a year ago, June a year ago, and I was asked by Katie Williams' family to preach her funeral, and I didn't get to see many of you. That was the first time I'd been back, and it was kind of, and then Bob contacted me, I don't know how many months ago. I was like, yes, I'll come back to the well and speak. I said, Bob, this is the first time I've been able to come back. I've been asked to come back. And so I was so excited and said yes, and it didn't really hit me that I was coming back to speak to you all until I crossed that bridge. And my stomach just went into knots. And my stomach is in knots right now. I'm humbled to be back, and I appreciate you guys. This church shaped me and my family in ways that you'll never know, and in ways that I'll never know. And I appreciate that. And let me just kind of do what I used to do upstairs, okay? You know, I've been a Christian for over 30 years. And for some of you, that's like nothing, but I grew up basically a functional pagan, and I became a Christian when I was in the Army. And over the years, my faith has grown. Sometimes in leaps and bounds, sometimes in starts and fits. I entered that gate a long time ago. But my journey hasn't been pretty. Though sometimes it has been marvelous. I've somehow managed to avoid most of the pitfalls, though I found myself in the ditch more than once. I've experienced tremendous blessings and my share of trials. And probably like many of you, I wish I could go back and undo some of the things that I have done, but I can't. And I must, like you, live with what I've done or not done. Such is the life of a Christian. You know, I wonder, as I was thinking about preparing for this talk, I knew a passage I wanted to go to, and I'll take us to that passage in just a moment. But as I was writing this, I started thinking about John Bunyan. Now, anybody read The Pilgrim's Progress? Maybe some years ago, but I wonder if that's kind of what John Bunyan was after when he was writing this allegory about Christian, about his character Christian and his progress. I mean, my journey feels an awful lot like Christian's journey, if you're familiar with it, and perhaps yours too. From time to time, I've journeyed with pliable, obstinate, and Mr. Worldly Wise Man. I've been aided by help and goodwill along the way, and I've always been thankful for them. And when I think about Sulphur, when I think about the well, I think about help and goodwill, and I'm especially grateful for my encounter with faithful. I've encountered a lot of faithful people, especially here. Also with hopeful. And I've had good years, I've had not so good years. And interestingly, my journey has been free from really personal tragedy. And I've had perhaps more than my share of good fortune. Now, so many of you have asked about my family, so let me I've been really, really fortunate. Taylor, my oldest, who was just a little squirt, is now going to be 26 next month, and he's married a Taylor. Taylor and Taylor Bonner. And yes, and we have as much fun with that as you think we might. They've been married 2 years now. Parker turned 21 on Saturday, and he is a philosophy major at Lipscomb. He's a junior. And my baby girl is taller than me, Amy, and Taylor. She's now 18 and a senior in high school and trying to figure out what her next steps are. So my journey has been, I've been incredibly blessed. And all in all, I've had a good life, and I have much to be grateful for, much to give thanks for. In all my years, it's never crossed my mind. In all my years, it's never crossed my mind to turn around and exit that narrow wicket gate that leads to life that I found all those years ago. Until now. Though my journey will forever be different, I find solace in two interrelated realities. A storm is very different than a shipwreck. They are not the same, and they should not be equated. Far too many have come to the false belief that questions and doubts about one's faith must mean that they are not Christian. That is blatantly false. That is false. This is equating a storm to a shipwreck, and they are not the same. Paul knew the difference when he was writing to Timothy about Hymenaeus and Alexander's faith. They had suffered a shipwreck. I am in a storm. Doubts and questions about one's faith are not the same as losing faith. Both Judas Iscariot and Peter, I need you guys to know something. This is the first time I've ever said this out loud to an audience. The person you guys knew when I was here is not the same person that's standing up before you now. And this is the first adult audience I've spoken to who said, well, I'm this close. I'm kind of shaking. Well, if Judas Iscariot and Peter turned their backs on Jesus, the difference is Peter's doubt was not the end of faith. Right? And the second reality is truly a mystery. To struggle with one's faith is often the sure sign that we actually have it. My friends, my family, I'm struggling. And I've been struggling for a while now. You know, the desert has always played an interesting role in the faith formation of God's people. Whether in the Hebrew Scriptures, the New Testament, or throughout Christian history, God has used the desert to shape the faith journeys of His people. And while they may not refer to their trials as deconstruction or doubt, the path of the journey is the same. Through the desert. There's this guy, Kenneth Archer, and he argues that we all, at some point, must cross what he calls the desert of skeptical criticism. I think that's a great 50-cent word. To me, it's the desert of doubt, or the desert of this sucks, or the desert of where in the world is God? Right? We all cross that desert. And it turns out what I'm facing is not unique even to me, and it's not new to me. Christians have been crossing this desert for a couple centuries. Many have crossed it before, and many try and cross it today. Author A.J. Swoboda believes that this journey raises some questions in his book, After Doubt. Some of these questions are this: how does one endure skeptical criticism faithfully and Christianly? Can one cross the desert into deeper faith, deeper hope, and trust in Christ? Is there a way to question our faith without losing it? One just can't feel and think or pray their way through the desert. And reality cannot be altered by denying it. The desert must be crossed, or else one's faith will die there. And as we all come to realize in time, I suspect I'm not the only one who's crossed through this desert. And we all come to realize that this is not a journey taken alone. With the communions of saints, both living and dead, that great cloud of witnesses, we come to realize that we're not alone. And through it all, we come to understand that God has been there the entire time. Swoboda says that there are, quote, no paths around this desert. The path forward is the ancient path. It is the holy precedent which follows along the ancient footsteps trodden long through that desert. And so I invite you to turn to 1 Kings 19. I have spoken from this passage more times than I know, and I've done a lot of things with this passage, but for the first time I think I'm seeing things in this passage I've never seen. When we open to 1 Kings 19, we find Elijah having just had this fantastic, amazing mountaintop experience on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal. Chapter 19 opens and Elijah is running for his life. He's fleeing Jezebel, and certainly after this amazing experience. And I really believe that this chapter is an interesting case study in faith and doubt. And what I want to do is I want to walk us through this chapter. And as an aside, let me just say this for those of you who like to know these kinds of things. Chapter 19, I'm not going to actually highlight this, but I want to share this. It's a giant chiastic structure. What it means is it's a big X. And at the center of this passage is one component. There's an A and an A prime, a B and a B prime. What it means is at the beginning, he leaves prophetic ministry. At the end, he enters back into prophetic ministry. And there's corresponding sections of this text all the way down to the center of it, which is Yahweh passes by. That's the main point of this text. So in the first 4 verses, Elijah flees from the world of prophetic ministry. I mean, the story opens with this reference to the event at Mount Carmel. He's been brave, he's been faithful, he's stood up to the prophets of Ahab and the prophets of Baal, and then he flees. And I don't know if the last time you've read this, but I've always asked the question. He's had this amazing mountaintop experience, and the very next chapter, he's running for his life. He literally calls upon the living God, fire down from heaven that engulfs everything, including the rocks. Could you imagine how hot that fire is? And in the next chapter, he's running for his life. I've never understood that until, I think, now. And so there's this kind of tension. Will Elijah continue to serve God as God's prophet or not? What has happened to his faith? It's obvious that something has crept in and given rise to doubt. And those false beliefs must be deconstructed. We go to verse 5. Look here. We'll go to verse 3. Elijah was afraid, so he got up and fled for his life to Beersheba in Judah. So he's gone all the way from the top of Mount Carmel, all the way down to the bottom of the map, if you will, and he's about ready to enter into the desert. And notice what he says here. He flees for his life. He left his servant there in Judah, in Beersheba, while he went a day's journey into the desert. Elijah's going into the desert to kill himself, to let himself die. He leaves the servant and the provisions, and he goes a day into the desert to give it all up. He went down and sat under a shrub, asked Yahweh to take his life. I've had enough. Now will Yahweh take my life? After all, I'm no better than my ancestors. He stretches out and fell asleep under the shrub, and all of a sudden, and you guys can read that. Jezebel sends a messenger of death, but Yahweh sends a messenger of life. And we begin to learn here that there is more to the divine plan than Elijah even understands himself. Elijah went out into the wilderness to end his journey, and God redirects, God nourishes, and sends him further into the wilderness. Food in the wilderness is a gentle reminder of the past, miraculous provision, resurrection, the mighty acts of God on Mount Carmel. And what's interesting is he leaves there and he sends them further south, 40 days and 40 nights to the great mountain of God, Mount Sinai. Is he going to be faithful Moses or stubborn Israel? Y'all, from where he was approximately down to Mount Sinai is 200 miles. There's no way he makes this alone. He journeys through the desert with God. He gets there, look at verse 9. He went to a cave there, spent the night, and all of a sudden Yahweh spoke to him. Why are you here? Now this is not he asks him this question, why are you here? And then later on he asks him the second question. That's the corresponding parts I was talking about. Why are you here? Look at his response. Well, I've been absolutely loyal to Yahweh, the sovereign God. But though the Israelites have abandoned the agreement they made with you, they tore down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword, I alone am left, and now they want to take my life. Now, when questioned here, Elijah's memory is selective. It's a selective memory. It speaks of Israel's apostasy. He speaks of prophetic casualties. And in a sense, he's got this exaggerated self-loathing, an exaggerated self-importance. He needs to be reminded of the past in order to remember who God is and what God has done. Consider this. This is a quote It's not my words. I don't remember who I got it from, but here it is. God's servants are not called to live on a mountaintop of spiritual ecstasy, close to God, but far from the world. They belong in the world, doing the work of God amidst the affairs of daily life. End quote. Notice that Yahweh does not respond to his whining, but instead gives him a fresh perspective. Look at verse 11, the first part of verse 11. Yahweh said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh. Look, Yahweh is ready to pass by." And then go down to verse 13. You see something very similar. When Elijah heard it, he covered his face with his robe and went out and stood at the entrance of the gate. Similar parts there. At the center of this passage is verses 11, the second part, 11 and 12. Read that with me. He says here, "A very powerful wind went before the Lord, digging into the mountain and causing landslides, but Yahweh was not in the wind. After the windstorm, there was an earthquake, but Yahweh was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but Yahweh was not in the fire. After the fire, there was this soft whisper." The sound of silence. There are allusions here to Moses when God shields Moses in the cleft of the rock. This gentle whisper, though, is interesting. It is at the center of this passage. Everything builds to this point and it builds back out. This gentle whisper raises implications. It's the voice and sound through which God speaks, and it is barely audible, in stark contrast to the phenomena which preceded the voice. Various dramatic phenomena have been a part of Elijah's ministry. And if you follow Elijah's ministry, if you go back and look at that, his ministry is full of these tremendous acts. I mean, look, chapter 18 is case in point. Elijah must now be open to communication from God that comes through simple and unexpected means. God's presence in the stillness can be just as real and powerful as the other. And then as the text builds back out, he wraps the cloak over his face, and then you got the question again, what are you doing here? And notice Elijah says the same thing. He says the same thing, and the question is kind of asked, and it kind of strengthens the impression that Yahweh is not pleased with the prophet's withdrawal. But he didn't leave him. Verses 15 through 18 says this. Yahweh said to him, "Go back the way you came, and then head for the desert of Damascus. Go and anoint Hazael, king over Syria. You must anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah, to take your place as prophet. Jehu will kill anyone who escapes Hazael's sword, and Elisha will kill anyone who escapes Jehu's sword. I still have left in Israel 7,000 followers." Remember earlier he said he was all alone. Incorrect beliefs. False beliefs that needed to be deconstructed. And it's what Yahweh says here in this portion that really is the point of the gentle whisper. The text doesn't leave us hanging. What's the gentle whisper? Here we find out. Elisha's recommissioned. A new order succeeds the old. Victory over Baal worship will come through not these great dramatic acts, but through the political process. Think about that. Not through obviously spectacular demonstrations of power. And Elisha learns that his new role, it's clear, it's partly to fight, but also partly to prepare the way for others. And what he learns here, and what we learn here, is that Yahweh has other ways of working. Often we think that we're in the center of it and God works in particular specific ways or works through us, and we think it happens this way, it goes this way, we do it this way. And Elijah, he got caught up in that, and he begins to realize that God is bigger than Elijah. And that God can work in ways that Elijah doesn't even understand. There are more servants than just Elijah, and the overall strategy is long-term, and it's more subtle than Elijah might have imagined. God is in control. He has an agenda for history from the beginning, and it involved the gentle, silent, and devastating whisper, as well as the all-consuming fire. Elijah must be content with being part of the plan, not the plan itself. In the last part of the chapter, verses 19 through 21, Elijah enters back into prophetic ministry, and it demonstrates that God's assurance and recommissioning have had the desired effect. Elijah obeys and returns the way he came, back to Damascus. Now, there's some immediate and practical takeaways. I'm going to rattle through them real quick, but I don't want to camp on them, because I want to get to something else. And they're not explicitly about faith and doubt, which is really what I want to tackle tonight. The first is God can be found in the still, silent things as well as the big and dramatic. I made the mistake while I was here thinking that God showed up only in the mountaintop experiences. Notice that almost all the things that Tom recounted were trips. God's definitely in the retreats. God is definitely in the revivals, the camps, the mission trips, all of those things. But he isn't just there. He's more likely to work in and through the mundane tasks of our daily life. You go to bed tonight, and you get up out of bed in the morning, and you put your feet on the floor, whatever that looks like for you, God is working. Amen? God is more likely to work in the valleys than on the mountaintops, but God is certainly on the mountaintops. I tell you, don't ever pray for your group to have a together experience on a mission trip. God will give you 3 flat tires. At least that's how, it probably wasn't that many. That's what it felt like, right, Frank? I'm ever thankful for that tank that you put in the back of that trailer. I was like, Frank, we don't need that tank. Steve, let's just take it. Frank, it's going to be fun. Steve, let's just take that tank of air. Thank God we had a tank of air. God may not work through us the way we thought, or the way we think he ought. Our role might be to prepare the way for others. God's plan is bigger than any of us. We have a part in God's bigger story, and each part is important. And I think one of the things I'm left with this passage is God is still in control. Those are some quick takeaways. I'm going to set them over here, share those with you. What are we to make of Elijah's journey? What are we to make of Elijah's journey through the desert of skeptical criticism? And I can only speak for myself. But Elijah's story here gives me hope. Elijah is literally the hand of God on top of Mount Carmel, and then chapter 19 opens with him running away. So much so that he intends to take his own life. Does he have doubt? I'd say so. Does he have some thinking or beliefs that need to be deconstructed? Probably so. Why did he flee, though? Why did he flee? Well, God presumably knows the answer. He did not shy away from asking Elijah why he was there. He still asks it. He still cares enough to know, to ask, why is this going on? Was Elijah scared? Probably. I would be. Was his faith shaken? Likely. Was he wrong about what he believed? Apparently so. And it appears, though, that he fled as a means to encounter God. I want to put that out there. Let me explain. I don't think the journey of leaving, now listen to me carefully in the context of what I've just said. I do not think the journey of leaving should be vilified. It just may be that part of biblical faith is actually about leaving. Consider John the Baptist. We've probably never seen John the Baptist in this life. He is another desert sojourner. He actually left his father, Zechariah. Think about that. Rather than continue his dad's work in the temple, John flees to the desert to prepare the way of Jesus. And when we consider this through the lens of an honor culture, this break is significant. Significant. John faithfully breaks away from family, from community in the past, to follow God's call. Let that settle in. In my family systems work, we call this self-differentiation. Now I'm going to take a sharp aside here. And you might want to draw your shoes up a little bit. I believe one of the reasons so many young people deconstruct their faith instead of their beliefs so radically after leaving home is that they were never given a chance to differentiate when they were in church, when they were in the home. Young people tend to act or react or even overreact from their families and communities of faith because they were never allowed or given agency as children. Remember this, friends. And most of you, I know some of you have little children, and most of you are parents and grandparents. Our children are created in the image of God. Do we believe that? Do we believe that our children are created in the image of God? Yes, we do, right? We do. From birth, children have the capacity to know God, to sense God's very presence working in the world, and to be active participants in the community of faith. Spirituality is an inherent value. Spirituality is an inherent part of their humanity. They are born with it. If you spend any time with a little kid, you know this. That our children are created in the image of God means that they have an inherent value, and their value is not in their performance. Their value is not what others say about them. Their value is in that their status as children of God. That's who they are. So our children are not merely blank slates, sponges, or empty vessels ready to be filled as passive recipients of spiritual information. Our children are born as active makers of spiritual meaning. When treated as raw material to be shaped and molded, we rob them of their agency. There is a profound difference between active, growing relational beings and passive blank slates. So, faith formation, hear me carefully here, it's not about passing on our faith. Passing language ignores the agency of the child. If children only receive faith from their parents, from their churches, then they're not being fully welcomed, nor are they being expected to participate. When we do this, our children become consumers. Our parents become faith distribution managers. Faith distribution managers languishing in fear, by the way. And God becomes a static commodity that is consumed rather than a living being who is engaged in faith. In my experience, what we have done is we have predetermined how it is our children are going to do church. We have predetermined how it is they're going to have a relationship with God. We said, you're going to do it this way, you're going to worship this way, you're going to walk this way, you're going to dress this way, you're going to talk this way. And we prepackaged it. We said, this is what you've got to do in order to be okay. This is what you've got to do in order to be Christian. We have passively passed on our faith, and we've not created an environment where they can develop the faith on their own in the context of a community. Generally speaking, that's what we've done. And when we do that, they come to me at university level, and they say, I don't believe it anymore. Elijah, like so many young people, had accepted some beliefs pre-critically. You think about it, vulnerable trust is in what we are taught is not a bad thing. Early on, I believed in the Trinity. But it wasn't because someone explained it perfectly to me. I believed in the Trinity because someone I trusted, someone I loved, someone who valued me as a person said, believe this, and I took it on faith. Now I know a little bit more about the Trinity, or I should say, I know a whole lot less than I ever did. Because the more questions I ask, the more I realize I don't know. But this vulnerability can also be problematic because the uncritical reception of good beliefs can also make space for the uncritical reception of bad beliefs. And during this stage, we often pick up cultural, environmental, and theological add-ons along the way that kind of slip into the gospel unawares. And so we receive the gospel, but also the opinions, the attitudes, and postures of our community of faith. This is a gospel plus. The plus needs to be rejected and deconstructed, not the gospel, not Jesus. There is a world of difference between deconstructed wrong beliefs and deconstructed faith. And I think with some of these wrong beliefs about God and God's people that Elijah needed some work on. He needed to differentiate, and to do this, he had to journey through the desert to encounter God. And goodness, what an encounter he had. And all that's left, much like what Job experienced, is this deafening silence of Yahweh's presence. It is this presence, though, that begins the reconstructing. His faith in God never wavered. His faith in God never wavered. His beliefs or understanding about what God was doing, or so he thought, did. See the difference? It was these beliefs that led him to despair. Paul writes that faith is a gift of God in Ephesians 2. Trust in God is a gift. But trusting in Jesus and having beliefs about Jesus are not the same. Faith is a gift. Beliefs are not. Forming beliefs takes time, takes intentionality and hard work, and sometimes those beliefs, when pre-critically received, need to be questioned. This is not work to be afraid of. It is work to be honored, embraced, and supported, especially when what is being questioned was passed down after you. I hope now you know why Elijah's story fills me with hope. Because I'm in the desert. And I've been in the desert since the fall of 2016. I'm trotting along that ancient holy path of skeptical criticism. And I know that I hold beliefs that need to be pruned. I understand that my faith needs to be strengthened. I, too, am searching for God as I flee from past hurt and pain. I tell my students, I've been telling my students this for many years, and this will resonate with many of you, I'm sure. I tell them, ministry students, Bible majors, etc., and I tell them, I say, some of the greatest things that have happened to me have happened in the church. And with one pause, some of the worst things that have happened to me have happened in the church. This great paradox of journeying with God's people in the in-between times. And my wife and I are the recipients of some significant pain and hurt. Amy and I nearly split up because of what happened in a church in West Texas. And praise God, we're together. We're coming up on 29 years. Well, what I didn't realize at the time is why we came back. I resigned my position at a church I was preaching at, and that was in November of 2016. We moved back to Tennessee in the spring of 2017, and that whole time we didn't go to church. We needed a break, let's be honest with you. Sometimes you just need a break, right? And then we found a church that was a church plant in Springville, Tennessee, a diverse church, a little bit different than what we had been a part of before. And we started attending there, and then pretty soon I'm being asked to preach, and Amy and I are asked to do leadership stuff, and Amy's teaching little kids and all of that. And all of that pain and hurt kind of got put on the back burner, but it didn't go away. COVID hit, we stopped going to church, and all of that came rushing to the surface. And now we're like in a tailspin. We're in a desert storm, if you will. Asking a lot of questions. I've been very open with my students because I want them to know that the person who's in front of them doesn't have all the answers. I'm on the same journey they are, I'm just in a different place. And here's kind of how I explain it to them. Our tradition is known for its head. A lot of thinking, not so much the heart, right? And I think our young people, particularly when I was here, did a good job of kind of helping us reconnect the head and the heart. My head and heart have been pulling me in my faith journey with God for a long time. Right now, my head's the only thing keeping me in the game. wife's not in. If that makes sense. I've done a lot of study, I've got a lot of experience, and I have faith, and it's those things that have kind of kept me going. I have no doubt my heart will pick back up, that I'll start feeling God again. Interestingly, looking at so many of you that I've loved for so long, it's good. Right now I'm making my way through the tailspin of events that took place almost 5 years ago. And sometimes I feel like I'm all alone. What Tom didn't read is, some of you don't know, I am the chair of the Bible department at Lipscomb University, and I'm one of the assistant deans in the college. And I'm in a faith struggle right now. And that's okay. My heart is chapped. My soul is dry, and sometimes I just want to give in. I just want to give up and lay down. But God is persistent, is He not? He won't leave me alone. He won't leave me alone. Out of the blue, Bob sends me an email and asks me to come speak here. God won't leave me alone. And He's met me a time or two in the desert to give me some nourishment, some protection. And it's in this sound of silence that I find encouragement and keep going. I don't know where you are in your journeys. I suspect maybe some of you have been in the desert, or you might feel like you're on the edge of it, or you have friends and family who are deep in the middle of the desert. Don't disparage that journey. But jump in the sand pit with them. Jump in the storm with them. And journey with them. They're not necessarily looking for answers as much as they're looking for presence. Some of you may have children who have left. They've not forgotten what they learned. Journey with them. Do not vilify the journey through the desert. God sent His people to the desert every time they need to learn who they were. He even sent Jesus into the desert. And sometimes His people make the journey that God's people have been making for millennia. God, thank You for this church family. For what it means to me, my family, what it means to so many in this community for so many years. A faithful, enduring presence. May You continue to work with them and through them to bless those who are in the desert place.